everyone, and welcome to the UX Research Rundown podcast. My name is Henrik Mattsson. I am the CEO of Lookback and your host for this show. And with me today, I have the one and only John Cutler, who, I'm a big fan. I'm sure a lot of people who are interested in building product and product management and all sorts of products and are on Twitter know about John, but we will get to know him even better. He's actually a researcher from the beginning, so I don't know how many people know that, but I think that's pretty awesome and not very surprising. And we're going to talk about my favorite problem, which is how do we get people who are not researchers or not people doing research to engage with all the research that we're doing and build better products and experiences as a result of that. Because if we do a bunch of research and no one engages with it, then it's very hard to change things. So thank you so much for being here, and welcome on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So as per ancient tradition, it's been one season. We always start by asking our guests to give us a bit of their origin story. And I'm sure, especially kind of the research part and how you got into that and how you got out of that and all that stuff. If you could give us some background, please, that would be a great start.
Sure. I dropped out of college and wanted to play music, and I had an idea for a video game, kind of going chronologically now at the moment. But I think that was my first foray into product. I had this small company and we made this game that was ultimately commercially a flop. So that's kind of funny. But that kind of kicked off a series of events. I was pretty just lost in my 20s, but also doing fun things. I was played with this band and we toured around a lot, and I would do these kind of various product-y like roles and not product-like roles for a good decade. And I sort of got a late start in this. And then I started to settle into more legitimate product roles in things like ad tech and sort of different media type things, different B2B things. And then probably, it's been 10 or a bit more years, kind of shifted and moved here to Santa Barbara from New York City. And at that point, it was a big change. But I was looking, after a little bit of consulting, I was looking for a job. And this started a series of working in B2B SaaS companies for the most part. And actually that job was a UX researcher. So I remember at the time I went out to coffee with the head of design for this company Appfolio. And she said, well, we're looking for this researcher. Have you done that? And I was kind of like, no, I haven't. And I started to do more stuff on it. And what's really funny, I always talk to JJ about it, but I'm probably wired in many ways to be a researcher, but then I also have this product man. It was probably not the best role at the end of the day because I probably should have been a product manager, but with this research bent. But I loved it. I remember for the interview, I prepared this heuristic review and I was like, this is great. And I loved going through the stuff. But that was a good experience because at that company, Appfolio, my role was primarily facilitatory. Like my role was to engage people with our customers. Obviously I did some nuts and bolts type work, doing usability, moderated usability testing sessions and different research methods that I was kind of learning and applying at the same time. But also I was the person, facilitating kickoffs for things. And JJ was very interested in doing, design sprints, and we were trying new things. We read that Lean UX book, which is a really good book by Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden, and we're trying to apply. So it was cool being at a company that was trying new things at a time when, without a lot of baggage, it's not like JJ was going in and saying, UXR must be run this way. It was a company with really strong product chops, and we were just trying different things. And it's actually funny, fun fact, I was a Lookback customer at the time because we were releasing a mobile. We needed it under the company was using, a lot of the people were using a mobile web version of this product on site doing maintenance repairs. And we knew nothing really about how they were interacting with the product. So I was very eager at that point to try to get the product set up so that we put a little wrapper around a web wrapper and called it the app. And I think we were trying to integrate the SDK, and we were getting these calls going. And I have some amazing calls. I was looking back at this, I have some power presentations I gave at the time of people like from the field, like talking about things using look back. So yeah, early customer at that point. But I think ultimately, kind of also had this product management thing. So I left there and worked at Zendesk, and then this company called Pendo, right, which did, analytics and sort of onboarding and things. And then my role recently for, 4 years was at Amplitude, where I was working with a lot of our customers and future customers, helping them kind of both with the product, but then also broader questions about how to quote unquote do product and use quantitative data in many cases. But a lot of that also involved talking with teams about how they approached research and other things. So yeah, been quite a journey to get this point. And then in 4 days, I'm starting in a director role at a company called Toast, where I'm going to be working in what they call product enablement. And what I love about that is my peers, I have peers in research operations and peers in design ops and peers in, roughly kind of product ops and these different things. So we're going to form this, we have this nice team of people doing this stuff. So I'm sure I'll be back in the game now as I'm doing it. So yeah, that's the long story, not so short.
Oh, love it. Awesome. Yeah. So I get so nostalgic when I hear these stories of like early look back customers that worked with the product, like, when when it was cool to just, you can record a mobile device. This is awesome. A lot of things have happened, and that's super cool. So do you think that your I have so many questions. I mean, I think this is going to be a great, you have very relevant experience, I think, for what I'm interested in talking about here. But I'll start with this. So in your new role now, and perhaps even in the role you're just leaving, do you still think that you have mostly that facilitator role, or like how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, that's so, I had a question with this career shift recently. I knew I wanted to go and be focusing internally. And so I had this career shift, do I want to get back in the thick of it of product management, being a product manager on a team, or ultimately, do I care a lot about like the health of the overall environment and thinking of what I do almost like as a platform, like facilitating and supporting people, enabling people within the company. And that was a hard question I had to ask myself, because, being a product manager and doing it's really fun. I remember it reminds me of music a lot. It reminds me of being in a band with a group of people. Like there's that sensation when you're a product manager and you're on a team. But then I had to think about, but then it's like one team, but what would it be like to do things that supported everyone? And so I ultimately, picked the latter approach this time around, and it probably will be more facilitation oriented. But I wanted to underscore that concept of like in product management, there's this idea of being like a platform product manager. And I think platform is an incredibly good analogy here. It's an overrun term. People say we've got a platform. They don't have a platform. But what I like about the word platform is the dynamics of what it means when there's a platform. You have many people who have different applications that they want to run. And you probably have to collect a lot of data for them. You have to do things, and then you need to have synthesize that in some ways. But the analogy actually works, where you have to collect this data and you have a common source of stuff, and then you have to synthesize it for different applications so people can do it. But when you think about like product enablement or even research operations or different things, you're in the business of like being a force multiplier for the organization, but you can't treat everyone the same way. You can't say, just do it this way and it's the only way to do it. You have to think, you have to be thoughtful about what people are trying to get out of it. So that's why when you mention, is it a facilitation thing? It is. And it's also that idea of like creating platforms within a company that help people do their jobs more effectively. And I think that, not to jump ahead too much, I think that for a lot of researchers, they're struggling so hard to even get anyone to pay attention to their research that they don't take a step back and they think, okay, ultimately the goal here is to help decision-making in this company. And my goal is to think about how creatively to scale expertise and scale the information we have to everyone. I understand the instinct to protect the research craft, and I think it's very important. But if you take a step back and if you think, I work in a company with 500 people, and what if I could up-level everyone in terms of the decisions that they're making? It's kind of a balance that everyone faces, I'm sure. But these are some of the things on my mind, even in this new role.
Yeah. Yes, and super interesting and spot on for this. It's funny. I always tell my guests, we only have one podcast episode. We're not going to be able to write the book on this. Like, you don't worry about covering everything. But seeing your Twitter production and the stuff, your productivity, perhaps we can write the book on this. So, like, if you would map it out of all of the kind of challenges involved organizationally and culturally, and with these facilitation roles and everything, in terms of carving out a place for research, because this is a process that have changed a lot over time. I mean, just in the 7 year that we're talking about now, since you were a researcher, it's like, research is more part of the organization now than it used to be. So people are arriving in this space. The engineers were there first, if we simplify, and then came the designers, perhaps, and then so how do you carve out that space in a collaborative way? Because it's not about claiming territory, although sometimes the rhetoric is a little bit like that. But, so how do you make that happen in that kind of magic way that we
Well, I think that one of the things is the realities to the analogy that I give, and even at Amplitude, look, I got briefly involved in education, and I was then helping, recently I was helping the team that was going to be responsible for community. And I think there's a list of things, and I even go back to when I was at Zendesk, I was the PM of search. Search is just like Google, right? It's easy. So one way to think of this is that organizations will always have community is a great example. You go into a company, say you want to do a community, they say, oh, you mean user groups? Like, no, there's much more to community. Or you go in and you say that you want to do, content, or you want to do evangelism, or you want to do education. It's just like Salesforce Trailhead, right? Oh, let's just do it this kind of way. And I just think that one thing to just let's bring out into the open is that in any specialized domain, there's always going to be this balance of having to advocate internally about what's possible about that particular discipline, how it can help people, what does good look like, why it's important. There's going to be questions about when to kind of protect the level of the craft versus maybe have a little less craft, but spread it more broadly in the organization. And everyone has that. And I think that's the first thing to accept. People who run education teams have the exact same discussion. They go in and they say, well, education is this whole art and this theory. And, hey, guess what? It's not just about courses. You have to create cohorts and community. So a deep education thinker has this whole laundry list of techniques and then has to meet with the executive who says it's like Trailhead, right? Or something. And so I think that my experience with talking to a lot of researchers sort of mimics that there's those sort of natural tensions. The thing. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. There's just a certain physics. Anytime you have an emergent area of specialization that not so many people know about, and it starts with generalists, and then there's a debate between specialization and to do that. I think that the second thing that comes to mind with it is one pattern that I see in a lot of organizations is that they're still just coming around to the idea that there's not just one motion and one way to run every single thing they do in their effort. And so this is not just about specialization, it's about standardization and consistency versus flexibility. So the first one is about the normal trouble that specialists have all the time. The second one is about the normal questions of centralization and standardization versus flexibility. So what you see with a lot of researchers, or the ones that I meet, is that this battle between we want to try to be involved, yet not all efforts are created equally. Not all initiatives are created the same way. Sometimes it really is good to tell a researcher to go off for 4 months and do something. Sometimes it really is. Many times it's not. Yet the company that goes in and say, we must run just one way of doing all things. And I think a lot of people I meet in the research ops space, this is their dilemma, where they instinctually understand that there's many different motions that they need to support, but they're struggling to even get one way to work right. So it's like, do I standardize and then make it easier for the organization to understand what we're proposing? Or do I decentralize what we're doing and be more flexible, which might be more effective on the ground, but maybe not more effective at explaining to those particular things? So that's the second one, I think. It's like the standardization versus the decentralization, building on the specialization thing. And then I think that the final pattern that I'm seeing out there when I'm chatting with people is the vast overlap in these, resolving the overlaps that are existing now at the moment, where you'll have these, research operations team, and then design operations team, and then a voice of customer team. What the hell are they doing? Why do they insist on owning this stream of information? My friend Michael is at Figma, and he's having to battle these things he's doing in research in voice of customer. But I think he's coming to the realization too. He's like, ultimately, we need to start thinking about the analytics side of it. We need to be thinking about community. So you'll note, he joked that you'll notice that some product leaders at Figma go on Twitter and say what should we build next? And you could imagine that you're sitting there in either the research ops team or the voice of customer team or the other team at Figma. You're like, what are you doing? We've got this dialed in. So I think that the final thing, which is the outgrowth of the first two, is that what you tend to see in organizations is that these sort of highly overlapping things reach almost kind of an inflection point where suddenly people start asking, should they just be in one cohesive group that thinks about these types of things? So I don't know if that helps, but those are the three patterns that I'm noticing that are probably not new to anyone listening to this, but if anything, I'm just reiterating the tensions that you're seeing, that the specialization stuff, the standardization stuff, and then the overlapping of emerging roles that causes both friction and advantages are like the physics of this problem. And so I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people would recognize themselves in that landscape. That's the world people are navigating. And it can vary from big companies to smaller companies to new companies to, it depends a little bit, but it's definitely something like that. And you can add other trade-offs to it too. I mean, a lot of research leaders I've talked to say that basically it's also a lot of their work is about navigating this landscape, helping their team navigate this landscape, building relationships across this landscape, building alliances across this landscape. But that's not in their job description. Their job description is
how do you get any work done if you're doing that? It's funny because I wrote this blog post called the integrator burden. And in that particular blog post, I dig into this challenge, and it was very interesting hearing different people. Some people said, this resonates so much, but I don't want to be the glue person anymore. I'm too burnt out. I can't be the glue person during the pandemic anymore. My natural instincts as a researcher was also empathy and glue and shared understanding. And in fact, I'm maxed out. I can't do it anymore and do my day job, of doing this stuff. So that resonates a lot. I mean, that's and I think this is what I've noticed about a lot of folks in research, and a lot of just more thoughtful is a judgment-based word, but they might just be more systems thinking types or whatever. There's just a lot of burden that goes along with that particular work that can be difficult. I mean, I even remember at some place at Appfolio, just even being in the thick of things, sometimes you just see more of the organization than you might expect in those roles, which is pretty heavy.
Yeah, so I think I haven't really had I haven't gotten a research leader to kind of admit it, but sometimes I ask about who should carry that burden, and isn't it a bit unfair that falls on, let's say, the research leadership, right? Because ultimately, this is just a theory I have. I think that we're moving into times when this kind of idea that you can compete and build great products without having a sophisticated kind of research practice and understand, looking at all of this data, qualitative and quantitative, is kind of an obsolete idea. Those days are over, and we need to do this. So it's in the company's interest to make this happen, but the burden often falls on the research leadership, for example. Could be other functions too. And do you agree with that? And how do you think that different people in an organization should should relate to that, and whose responsibility is it, so to speak?
Well, I think that part of it is, I think that part of it is just due to sheer exposure, not necessarily, I don't think it's like malintent of the organization.
Sure.
And then I think another part of it is that, like most parts of most organizations, do not slice across the org, right? So you'll notice that people in like human resources or people teams often feel that burden, obviously, or anyone it's sort of like has insights and bridges across those things. So I think that there's part of it that's just a byproduct of that type of role. But I agree with you that I think that ultimately it falls on the CEO, I guess, and other product leaders to admit that this is a part of their tool chest. I think what I'm noticing out there is that there's still, with a lot of companies, there's sort of I'm a product leader, I'm a CPO, so therefore I need a counterpart, I need a CDO. Okay, that's great. And we're going to have we're going to create this triad and this trio, and it's going to be great. I think that people still haven't, they still just kind of lump in a lot of these other leaders underneath those other leaders. Like, yeah, well, the head, the researching. I think that what we probably will get to is not in the next year or two or whatever. I think you'll get to a place where we won't talk about trios as much as we'll talk about like the 4 or 5 heads.
Yeah.
And there'll be someone who sits alongside those folks who obviously partners a lot with design, but is thinking about really holistically about insights and has a very broad remit around qualitative and quantitative stuff. And I guess then the question is like, how will design interact with that, or will design try to withhold back the sort of the design aspect of that versus the quant stuff or other things? I think that's TBD. I think that's the tension that you're seeing in a lot of companies now at the moment.
Yeah. So quick follow-up on that. I have another theory. So this is not me coming up with this stuff. I'm just observing some things. But I see across pretty much every tool space, we're moving towards more and more collaboration, right? So, it started, like if we take developers like, GitHub and stuff like that, it started pretty early for obvious reasons. And then, designers were kind of working in isolation for a long time. Then like they got Figma and tools like that, where it's very much about real-time collaboration and stuff like that. And that's what we're seeing also in when we do research with Lookback, and we realize, hey, like it used to be about recording sessions. That's not what it's about anymore. It's not even about almost, there are some table stakes. You need to be able to record sessions. You need to be able to, run the analysis after, et cetera, but it's really about kind of the live cross-team collaboration. It sounds like a fancy speech or something, but it's really like coming into fruition with the help of technology, but also with the help of maturity in different companies. And I wonder if that's something you also see, and if you think that there's some sort of, what does that mean to our industry and the way that it's organized in across different companies? Will we have a breakup of all of these silos, or will there be kind of a counter movement, or what do you think?
Well, I think that I think of the work of someone like Matt Skelton, who wrote this book, Team Topologies, and he's very focused in that book about describing different teams. But he hits on the point of just there is a limit, there is a cognitive limit over which you hit points of cognitive overload and cognitive drain of the teams. And the interesting part of that book is, we talk about silos, so when after reading that book, one says, well, naturally occurring wall might be of benefit. Can you peek your head through it?
Yeah.
And so I think that what we're going to see is much more thoughtful organizational design. And what I mean by that is that at the moment, what you see is these very brute force matrixing efforts, or, one dominant way that everyone is supposed to work. And when you think about Matt's book, and if you want to research it, it's actually like a great book, and I recommend it. He talks about like enabling teams, and there's value stream oriented teams, and there's specialized subsystem teams. I love the words that he uses because it gets you thinking about like, no, there's not just one way to run this. It's not just like either the matrix or functional groups. There's ways to be extremely thoughtful about this. And that to me is kind of the future of this, where the future will not be infinitely collaborative, cognitive overhead, interruptions every single moment, infinitely real time or anything like that, because we just have natural limits. Like you cannot expose a group of 6, 7, 8 people to so much information. And the technology is just accelerating the rate at which we can either access the information or derive insights from the information or whatever. But there's a limit, right?
Clearly, yeah.
And it used to be that the limit was just the effort required to get the information. But now with like tools like Look Back and other things, the collecting of the data and even synthesizing it to a point is taking a little less cognitive overload. But you still have to process it and turn it into action.
Right.
So I think what's going to happen is we're going to reach a point where the primary limiter is the ability to synthesize and utilize the information, meaning turn it into decisions and turn it into action. And there's going to be a trend of thoughtful org design where people respect that there can't just be sort of one functional or matrix model, whatever. And so what would that look like in practice? That would look like in practice that you would have a research team that would divide itself into more platform-like, centralized, what we might call like town planners. Like they're the ones who can raise all the ships and get things to work across the whole company. And then you'll have aspects of the research team that almost can like parachute in, so to say, right? When there's a specialized problem that needs to be solved. And then you might have people like you see this evolution in marketing and marketing operations that are just working all day on systems and just making sure that the plumbing is working, right?
Right.
So Simon Wardley has this idea of like pioneer settlers and town planners. But the interesting part about that, other than the words can be a little iffy, it sounds very like, crusading or whatever. The interesting part about that is that the work of the pioneers is made possible by the work of the town planners. So you could imagine that when in the United States, they were going across the West in the westward expansion, Chicago was a hub and it was run by town planners. Right. And they made sure you could get the supplies you need to go off and find California, right?
Right.
Or find gold or doing whatever you were doing. Certainly there were people in California before people found them. But you get the idea that what I'm trying to present here is that in practice, you'll see much more nuance in the org design. And then I think there's a physics to the problem where you'll still need to define relationships between groups and be more fluid, but there'll just be more sort of thoughtful processing. I don't know if that answered your question or if I took it to a different place, but I think that's the future. And I don't think endless collaboration and or endless real time is even possible nor desirable.
Yeah,
in many ways.
No, I when you were saying this, I thought back to my PhD days. I did a PhD in economics, and there's this German economist who said Lösch, who said something to something like this. He said the only reason we can endure at all is because not everything rushes in, not everything happens to you all the time, and there's definitely that cognitive limit. So this is super interesting. I as a tool person, when I started thinking about these things, I was like, we're going to fix this with the tool. The tool is going to fix it, But then as I've matured, I've realized that, this has a lot of aspects. It has these organizational aspects. It has these kind of leadership aspects. It has these builders aspect, and it has a tool aspect. And what do you think are going to be some of the kind of the leaders of this? Is it going to be technology, product, organizational theory? Like, what's going to bring about this new order?
Well, I think that it's already happening, and it's happening in organizations that have a mix of sort of systems thinking, operational, we would call it like an operations 3.0 approach, where they're thinking more, not standardization is not the be all end all, to that type of thing. And then I think it's going to be about deep, passionate people and the sort of coming from many different perspectives. The sort of, it's funny because even within product, there's like the product design perspective, and then the design perspective. There's this overlapping camp of the UX perspective. Then there's the research community, and then that overlaps with product in the discovery community or whatever that is. And then on and on and on. So I think that it's going to be a combination of those traits, just like passion for the craft, passion for thoughtful approaches to operations, and then also just the sheer element of competition. When companies are getting, just soundly beaten by companies that have figured out some of these elements. I mean, when I talked to Michael at Figma, just the level that they're even thinking about this stuff and the thoughtfulness they're putting towards some of these and it's funny, I've had conversations with product ops folks and then research ops and VOC people at the same time. And is anything perfect? No, but just that they're having people going to work thinking about this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. What role do you think that research is going to have in it? And when I say research, you can answer this as you will, either kind of research the function, but what I see in our research on kind of how companies research is that the act of kind of engaging with user research, perhaps like live observing something, watching a user struggle, becomes kind of like a focusing force, because that's really what it's about, right? You see like the experience you're building and you're in there and you're kind of seeing it in action. Sometimes product building can be a very theoretical exercise, or like even like you're sitting with your team and you're reviewing your stuff, each other's stuff, and you're reviewing each other's code. But when you're like in front of the user who's struggling with the real thing, it becomes like this common force. Do you think that that's right? And like what kind of role would that play in this?
Well, one thing that stands out, maybe I'm just repeating what you're saying in a way, is that when I think about, so I'm just going back to my days doing research at this company called Appfolio, and certainly there was a larger team, but my goodness, the power of having a well-curated research panel of 1,000 odd people that were willing to fill out screeners to be involved as, co-participants in the design of new features and respond to different types of studies, like having that access and eliminating the friction. While at the same time, this is actually a great example. Like many people are like, just contact any customer you want all the time. Like we should be able to talk to any customer at a time. Great. Some companies haven't even gotten to that point. That's actually extremely difficult. The next level is to think like, well, we know from a research perspective that just asking everyone any question for all the time is not going to help us out really. Like you want a representative sample, you want like to engage the people in a participatory process you're doing. So that's like kind of a next level thing, like, okay, well, we're not just going to, great, we've gotten over the burden of just, can people even get in touch with customers? Now they get in touch with the right customers. And then it seems like there's a next level above that, right? Which is, okay, they're in touch with the customers, but are we using the right representative sample of customers? But are we using the appropriate techniques relevant to the product challenge at hand? So like, we've gotten in the contact, we've made sure that it's representative. Now are we applying the correct techniques?
Right.
Okay, great. And you can see how technology probably enables all these particular things. I mean, many companies are just struggling with the dumbest problem about there's some customer success manager who feels they need to sign off on someone calling the customer, and there's no way to either automate that or make that like just mind-numbing problems.
Yeah.
But once you're through those things and you get through the basics, and then you start thinking about representative samples, and then you start thinking about the right techniques and doing that, I think that the next level then for that is, the refinement of that technique is knowing when to go really super deep in terms of the discipline and rigor of what you're doing. So you do meet plenty of organizations that seem to have a research team and they're always advocating, and product seems to enjoy what they're doing, and kind of product is grateful. They love their researchers for doing it, but there's still not a perception of when and how to apply high rigor to the problems that they're doing. So we could go on and on across this progression, it's sort of a progression of things, but I think, I don't know if it answers the question specifically, but I feel that those are those sort of those are the steps that are necessary. But one thing to keep in mind is I think that it's a progression for every company, and you reach a plateau, and then it's like you've got to think about the next level of it. So, the companies that have incredibly easy access to customers, at a certain point, if you sit on your laurels and you say, well, we've done it now, we figured that out. No more, we don't need to improve what we're doing anymore.
Right.
And then that seems to be where the trouble happens. But going back to what you said, though, I mean, how many teams don't experience that magic of, that's what I loved about Look Back at that time, was just, oh my God, how amazing was that? How amazing was it to get insights into someone interacting with the surface area of the product in a more natural way. But this is my point about the rigor thing. If you go to someone who does deep ethnographic research and understands all the literature and stuff behind it, it's funny, they'll like look at that and they'll be like, ha, ha, ha. Where is your ethnographic study plan? Like, what are you doing? And you're sort of saying to them like, hey, I understand all that exists, but this is magic. I'm talking to you as a product manager now. Like, this is magic. No, it's not magic. Back at the university when we did this is, go and I will cite, study XYZ, published in 1994, that this is not good ethnographic study.
Yeah.
So I think that's where, but back to the point is that if just speaking as a product manager, I think that sometimes researchers underestimate the very basic connections that can be created. And they're right to be suspect of it because it could go in the wrong direction if you didn't expect. But like, I don't know. It's just magic. Putting my PM hat on, it's just magic. Yeah.
No, totally. And it's very unexpected too. It's hard to plan for. It's just sometimes it happens and you need to take care of it. So cool. I would love to just keep talking forever and ever, but I'm going to try to to reach some sort of conclusion here. So if we take the perspective of a listener now who is in this field, an up-and-coming research leader, and thinks that, well, yeah, this is an exciting future. There's plenty of work left to be done here. Like, do you have any advice on like how to navigate this? If you want to be at the forefront of this development that you're talking about, like, who do you ally with in organizations? What do you read? What do you do to kind of bring yourself closer to that?
Well, this to follow on the theme that what we've been talking about. I think that you pointed it out. I think we were talking about like kind of commanding a certain high ground or space in the company and how there are advantages to that, but that's like ultimately not the final goal.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's what I'm noticing for a lot of, I speak to some design leaders and they're like, okay, it's taken us 6 years. We finally got the kind of respect we need. And they'll even talk sometimes about like installing processes that they realized were not really optimal, but they had to do to just get people going through the motions.
Yeah.
And I think that what this brings us to is the idea that like, and not to try to interject with another model that maybe the researchers are like, why are you telling us about that model? I think to me, the thinking around thinking of these as internal products, there is that element of like, are we truly succeeding? That's what outcome-driven thinking is. And so I think it's so easy if you're doing in research being like, we did what we could. We delivered the study the way we did, or we got Look Back installed, and that's what, we said we would do that. Or from a research, we did the best we could to tell product what they should get up to, and they ultimately didn't take our advice.
Yeah.
I think that like, it sounds probably cliche for me to say it, but I think preparing yourself for a career situation where you're essentially owning a platform, you're owning an internal product that's meant to up-level the whole organization, and asking like, are we doing the job? Are we succeeding as from an outcome-driven standpoint? I think that's a very uncomfortable, but I think that's the step that a lot of leaders need to think about. So kind of it's almost like once you're at the seat of the table, then the real work starts, which is the most depressing thing to say. You've been working for 10 years to get the seat at the table, right?
Yeah, it's almost like a generational thing there where think about the generations, my grandmother, my father, like put me in a position to do something meaningful, right? Through all their hard work, but they wouldn't get any credit for it. So there's going to be some generations
Yeah,
that
that's
build
a
it up. But
huge. Yeah,
yeah, I was
I was going to
thinking,
just add one thing
sorry,
related
go ahead.
to that. Like, I think that this is. I said all that, but I wanted to caveat that by saying there's a huge problem right now with the product world, that the product world takes credit for the hard work that's been put in place by a lot of design folks or other folks from things, where they sort of are like, we've just reinvented this new thing and it's great. We're going to reinvent UX research, or we're going to reinvent that. I wanted to be really clear to say, when I'm talking about like adopting a sort of outcome focused mindset with it, I'm not asking people to sort of succumb to the buzzwords of product or whatever. I'm just saying that, like, we could remove the word product and just think about outcomes from that. I'm saying that that's sort of the next progression for that. But the idea that a lot of these advancements in UX research were on the shoulders of people who are not really getting any credit for it. And meanwhile, orgs are like reinventing UX research from the ground up. That bothers me a lot.
Yeah, totally. But I do think on the positive side of that, I mean, you can call it product or whatever, but I've talked to other research leaders who've kind of said the same thing, where researchers actually have all of the tools that it takes to understand why a product, how a product actually is performing, and what to do about it. That's the job, right? And it's just apply those skills to the product that is research within the company.
Right. That's a great way to, and that's what the best folks are doing too. I talked with the research leader recently, and they're like, we've done a research study on research at the company. I mean, I love that you bring that up, because that's like, all the tools are in place, the systems thinking, the outcome centricity, connecting with people, being thoughtful about it. I would say that some of the additional tools of like this kind of operations 3.0 or the team topology stuff, thinking about the org design stuff, that might not be in the wheelhouse of a lot of research folks. And certainly not in the wheelhouse of a lot of product folks either. So that's no judgment. It's just that you might want to think, if the goal is to apply that level of thinking to what you're doing, beyond saying our analysis of the situation is this, and here's the opportunity areas, which would be, a common thing. The next thing in the product thing is like, and we are going to try this for this outcome, and then we're going to reflect on the outcomes. It's like tacking on that little part at the end. That's important.
Yeah. Awesome. Wise words. I'm going to stop us there, John. I could talk forever, but thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. And
sure, yeah, this is great.
Awesome. An honor to have you. And we're gonna see each other on the Twitters, and also follow this podcast season. This is season number 2, and there's been a lot of great leaders on for season number 1 too. So have fun with it. Happy researching. Be kind, and take it one day at a time. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.